So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us at the Southeast Asia Council Brown Bag series for today's panel discussion on resistance and literature, struggles for freedom and justice in Burma, Myanmar. Today's panel will include three speakers, Tada Ele, who has published 4 novels and 2 short story collections. She is currently working as a researcher on gender and media-related studies for Burma-based international NGOs. In 2021, she enrolled in the PhD program in political science at McMaster University, Canada. Welcome, Tada Ele. Koko Tet is a Burma-born poet, literary translator, and poetry editor for Mekong Review. He started writing poems for Samizdat pamphlets at the Yangon Institute of Technology in the 1990s. After a brush with the authorities in 1996 student protest, he left Burma in 1997 and has led an itinerant life ever since. Koko Tet has published and edited several collections of poetry and translations in both Burmese and English. His most recent poetry collection is Bamboo Phobia from Zephyr Press. He lives in Norwich of the UK. Dr. Ma Thida is currently a visiting research associate at the Council on Southeast Asian Studies here at Yale, and she's also the spearhead organizer of this panel. She's published more than 25 books, including a prison memoir. She is also an alumni of writing programs of the University of Iowa, Brown University, and of Radcliffe Fellowship at Harvard University. She is recently elected as the chair of the Writer in Prison Committee of PEN International. Please join me in welcoming all 3 of these panelists. So what we'll follow from this point on for a little bit, we'll open a kind of open discussion about the literary life of writers in Myanmar. And what I'll do is pose a few questions that each of the panelists will kind of go through in a series to talk and reflect on some of their experiences. And then we'll share a piece of writing from each of them, and then we'll have an open Q&A after that. So the first question I want to ask for all three of you is really just to take us into the literary world of Myanmar when you discovered yourself as a writer. How did you become a writer? And what were your influences when you were a writer as a young reader thinking about the literary world? Who were you reading? Who were you thinking about? And what kind of conditions were you facing as a writer? So I'll start with Ma Thida.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Eric. I think I became a very, very voracious reader at first. So reading makes me pretty much inspiring. And then after that, I think I also want to share some of my thoughts, opinions, and my writing skills with the readers. Then I became a writer. That's what I'm thinking, because, you know, reading, it's like a new world to me, you know, as a teenager. So I have been reading a lot in these days because of the very heavy censorship. The most available foreign literature is Soviet literature, you know. So I have been pretty much like that kind of the literature. It's already having more on the war and peace.
Ma Thida, you became muted, unfortunately.
Oh, sorry.
You said war and peace, and then you got muted.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, more like in that sense, war and peace or revolution, independence, fighting, something like that. So I pretty much follow this kind of the writing and the literature more on the personal autobiography of the independence fighters, not just from my country, but also from all over the world, something like that. And then I also pretty much reading most of the old writings too, because there is almost only available literature I can get access to. Even with that, it's pretty much hard for us. So I interested in also with my own experience. Both of my parents were not from Yangon, where we live. They were from the other states where the other ethnic minorities are. And both of my parents are not Burma majority. They are not Burma. So I have more experience in Shan State and Moon State. And every summer we visited, especially to Moon State, but sometimes to Shan State. So I've been, because of my parents, our families has been traveling inside the country, and I noticed the general public, everything is not very the same. And the lives in the other parts of the country is very different from where we do live. That with that notion, I'm interested in explaining or telling about their stories. But at the same time, I fall in love with the the linguistics itself, the grammar structure, the vocabularies, manipulation of the vocabularies, and the nature of the Burmese language itself has very rich in ambiguous vocabulary. So many aspects of the linguist make me wonder in writing that kind of thing. So I think for me, it's pretty much mixed in that sense. Becoming a writer, trying to talk about what's going on the ground, and noticing the resistance and independence fighting of the past. At the same time, I have a big notion about the linguist aspect of the literature too. But with that one, I really wrote a lot during my medical school days, but I have experience, I might say, to publish one of my short stories. It took me 12 years. To publish a novel, it took me 10 years. And to publish a book, it took me 30 years. So for me, writing is not directly related to publishing, So without expecting much on having chance to get published, I keep writing. That might be my decision throughout, I just want to write, and I wrote. That's all. So the experience as a writer in Myanmar in these days was...
You became muted again.
I didn't do anything. Maybe it's a system make me... Sorry about that. Yeah. So.
Well, we'll use this as an opportunity to turn to Kokotet. I hope that the muting is not a function of the censorship you've experienced in Myanmar sometime. Kokotet, please tell us about your experience entering to the world as a writer.
Well, I have had a somewhat slightly different experience than Matira, because, well, I was a keen writer during my formative years, but I didn't know what I would like to write. But it was only at the campus of Yangon Institute of Technology, which, was and remains a hotbed for student activism. I became a serious poet, a semestered poet. We had a circle of students who would like to publish our own poems, not necessarily political poems, but we would like to publish our own poems in our own way without having to negotiate the repressive censorship, that was prevalent in the early 1990s in Myanmar. So Matira says it took years for her to get published, but it was very easy for us because it was self-published, and the pamphlets and they are not even books, they are not even chapbooks, they are really small pamphlets. So that's how I became really into poetry, and I think that was my first, experience of publishing. Yeah, kind of self-published poet to begin with.
Kokotet, might I ask you, this is very interesting to hear about the way in which you started writing. What drove you to choose poetry as your preferred medium? What was it that attracted you to poetry? Was there something going on in the exchange of other writers in the Samizdat world, or something else that inspired you through poetry in particular?
Yes, I was exposed to this Samizdat circle. Most of them write poems. And also, of course, if you would like to publish a Samizdat, I mean, no other literary form will be practical, because the book has to be really slim and, will be the pamphlet size. They have to be slim and they have to be able to be hidden into another book. So poetry was a practical choice. And also, of course, I loved poetry, and I was inspired by contemporary poets of Myanmar like Pisani, Aung Chonwe, and Maung Pie Min, who I translated all over the past 10, 20 years. Yeah.
Just wanted to ask one more question on this, and we'll move on a little. But could you describe the conditions of Samizdat publishing? You mentioned the size of the pamphlet needing to be slim. I imagine that acquiring paper and finding means to print were not as straightforward as they might be, say, in contemporary New Haven, where I am right now. What were some of the challenges that you faced to actually produce some of these pamphlets?
Yes, we had several challenges, but my times were a little easier because I have seen some earlier, Samizdat publications which were printed out of Kestana kind of press, which is hand-ruled and sometimes typed and hand-ruled and hand-copied and distributed. But in my time, there were some computers because we were engineering students, and one of my friends actually ran a publication, was a publisher. So he helped us actually make those pamphlets by typing into the computer and just printing them out. So it was much easier for us. But earlier than our days, it was much more difficult. Yeah.
Let's turn now to Tada Ele. Tell us a little bit about your experience emerging as a writer.
Thank you for giving me a chance to share my passion story. Actually, I would say it is because of my mother I became a writer, because she cultivated my reading and writing practice since my childhood. Because when I was a child, and it was around 10 years old, my mother gave me a book which is called Salada Diary. Salada is a young girl living in Sarajevo, and she wrote about her life during the Bosnian War. So from the Chinese perspective, so it's like an Anne Frank diary. So she became well known after her book released, and finally the UN helped her family to move to Paris. So after reading her diary, my mom told me, if you want to go to Paris like Zalata, you also need to keep a diary. So I started noting down all my daily life into my diary. And another thing is, as my father is also a short story writer, he encouraged me to work as a journalist for a newspaper. So yeah, so after I was graduated from the University of Foreign Languages, I became a journalist. So the most challenging thing at the time is, and it is that we didn't have press freedom at the time. So censorship is the most challenging thing. So but after 2008, we came to know that we can create blog and website, and we can also post there for anything what we wanted to write. So around 2010, I published an online magazine, which is called Neshoot. And then in 2017, I published my first novel, which is a print version. So to say frankly, whenever I write something, I feel that I am representing the group. So that's why writing is one of my favorite things, because I feel that I can represent the groups. And then I prefer to read the books written by female authors, Virginia Wood, Simone de Beauvoir, and some other Burmese female writers, as I love to know how women approach the society from a female perspective through literature. That's why. Thank you.
It's really interesting what you were saying about the moments in which you were able to find the opportunity to start publishing. You mentioned 2010, 2017. Many of us here recognize the importance of that period of change. So I'm going to circle back to you, because this is a topic I wanted to raise with Kokotet first, but then we'll come back to you. I want you to pick up on that. But the question I have, among scholars and observers, 2011 is often spoken of as a kind of watershed year, as an emergence of a kind of new set of potential freedoms. But there's also been talk in the scholarship and among observers that it was a kind of ephemeral moment as well. And the coup of 2021 has been a very dark shift back to an alternative, more repressive approach to governance, right? And so what I wanted you to reflect upon is, if you could tell me a little bit about the difference as a writer. What did it feel like to be a writer before 2011, from 2011 to 2021, and then into today, and to kind of give us a sense of the really dramatic differences of those conditions and what it meant to be a writer during those periods. And Kokotet, I wanted to start with you, because I know that you've been an itinerant writer in many ways, but there was a period in there where you had returned to Myanmar as well, and I thought you might be able to start us off on that conversation.
Yes. Before the decade of 2010s, the situation when I was living in Myanmar, before I left Myanmar in the 1990s, the situation was abysmal. The decade started off with the 1988 nationwide uprising and the 1990 election, where the opposition party National League for Democracy won a landslide. So in that decade, I think dozens of well-known writers, including Matida, Matengi, and so many others, were jailed. So the situation was really abysmal. And to write freely means, to publish just illegally, which we did. So that was the situation before 2010s. And in the 2010s, I was observing the situation from a distance. But three things happened in Myanmar. The first thing was introduction of the internet or social media and mobile devices. And the second thing was the removal of much of the censorship in 2012. And the third one was coming of age of the so-called digital generation. So these three things converged, and there was a sea change in the landscape, literary landscape in Burma. So when I returned to Myanmar in 2012, after I left the country in 1997, okay? And 15 years, it took me 15 years to return to Burma. And when I returned to the country in 2012, I noticed there was a sea change in publication and literary landscape, as if the 1990s never existed. Having said that, of course, some writers and poets were also jailed in the 2010s, even under the NLD government. So today, since the February coup, writers and poets continue to write. But as far as I know, no single writer or poet has been jailed or targeted for their writing. Writers and poets have been jailed or murdered because they were, leading the protests, or they were part of the protests, but not a single writer had been jailed for their writing. So in my opinion, it's more like self-censorship today than, the repressive regime of censorship.
So Tada Ele, maybe you could return to what you were describing about some of the transformation in your own writing. So how did you experience those periods?
Yes, I would say after 2012, we enjoyed the right to freedom of expressions. Yeah, that it's not not a totally one because I would say it's just a partial freedom, because the civilian government still wanted to push self-censorship practice. It means that we did not need to submit our writings to the press scrutiny board before publication, but we just needed to edit our writings by ourselves. That was not to be against the existing law. But you know, it's not clear, what kinds of things are supposed to be in violation of existing laws. That's why our life is really risky, I would say. So, it was like we could be taken action at any time, or prosecuted or arrested under the national security law, cyber law, or the telecommunication law. That's why, but I would say as long as the dictators' repression strategies are getting harsh, our defensive mechanism has also been changed to respond to their repressions. You know, what I would like to say is those restrictions cannot stop our creation and our flowing ideas. But in the previous time, in the heyday of press scrutiny board, the writers didn't have a chance to talk about human rights abuse issues, or poverty, or ethnic conflicts, or democracy through their writings. So they had to use some metaphors. Including that metaphors can reflect what they wanted to say in some ways when they wanted to present as stories. So because at the time we had only a print media platform, but now the situation is changing as we have online platform as well. So the way of their repressions was changed to digital repressions along with the digital authoritarianism. Then our resistance strategies were also changed. So for the time being, the military restricted the internet line, banned some websites, and arrested some people for using the VPN. Although we had such kind of challenges on our side, we published the online newsletter, which are more concerned with the news articles or other creative writings about the current revolutions. And we did fundraising by using the click to donate site. You know, it means that when we visit our website and when we have a great number of visitors and viewers who views the advertising on our channels, we will earn some money. So we post our stories or audio books on our channels. Then we invite people to come and visit to our site, read the story or listen to the audio books. By doing that, we have two benefits. The first one is we can spread what we want to say to the audience through online platform. And the second one is we can make some income. So that income is now going to donations for those who join the civil disobedience movement, and for the IDPs, and also for the human rights defenders and protesters. So that is how we resist the repression of the military on freedom of expression by using the digital media. Yeah.
So what you're describing now, these channels in which people can read and submit a donation for the privilege of reading the work. Those are ongoing at the moment right now, in the current moment. I wondered if maybe when I'm talking to Matida in a moment, if you could share a link to some of those. I think that would be lovely for our viewers to know about.
Okay.
Are there any that are in English language also? Not that it has to be.
No, actually, the audiobook, yes, just in Burmese. But I would share the link. If you're interested.
Thank you. That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
So, Matida, I end with you on this topic. How did you experience the difference between before, during, and after the 2010s period?
First of all, I just want to say a cover writer has been arrested on the day of the coup. So even though we cannot say the reasons behind is thought to be because of their literary works and literary related activities. They were arrested because it was on the very early morning of the coup. That's why, a lot of, there are no more arrests or killing of the writers or poets after the coup based on their works. But on the day of the coup, we really don't know why, but there are a couple of writers like Maung Ta Chu, Tam Nhi Aung, Thiên Linh U, etc. So that's thought to be their work somehow related to the arrest. So I think before 2012, before the censorship has been released, people struggle. But we need to be very careful about the period of the censorship. It's 5 decades. It's from 1962 to 2012. So, for example, like some topics, land confiscation or criticisms against military, it turns out to be a taboo topics for every people, not just to the writers. For that reason, I think the self-censorship it's not being noticed as self-censorship. It's like a very standard normal, practice. People, the writers, the poets might write about something. They might be criticized. They might be pointed out of the bribery or corruption, etc. But they never ever think so much harsh criticisms against the military, because it's like for them it is the normal standard, not go beyond this line. So it is of course it's a kind of the unnoticed self-censorship, but at the same time the kind of the peer censorship is more on the racial or religious sensitivity. So it's the writers dare not to write something racially or religiously sensitive topics because there will be no censorship from the state, but from the peer groups, So they might give so much pressure. That's why not many writers are willing to cross this line too, something like that. So I think after the 2012 relaxation of the censorship, ending the press scrutiny board, we do have much more chance to be independent, to be free. But it's also depending on the either peer censorship or the self-censorship. Plus, there are still so many laws existing are pretty much prohibiting the freedom of expression. That's we have been working on. But good thing is after 2012, because of the Freedom of Association Law, Freedom of Association Act, there are so many new organizations, new institution has been came up. For example, like PAN Myanmar. So PAN Myanmar set up in 2013, and then we have been working mainly focused on the freedom of expression, not on the literature. But we did have a survey in 2018, and it's for a decade from 2008 to 2018. We have been reading more than 3,000 short stories published in 3 well-known literary magazines to find how much the Myanmar literature is inclusive in terms of gender, inclusive ethnicity, in terms of the demography, something like that. And also we have been surveying about what's the difference between the topics choosing or for these short stories. What we found it out is in terms of topics, it's not much change. Before the censorship and after the censorship, that's mean, a couple of new topics are becoming more presentable at the literary magazines. For example, like love stories of the LGBTQ community, something like that. And then a lot of the topics like bribery and corruption in the past. But not many writing about the land confiscation by army or the other sufferings in the ethnic groups. That's, I think, the education system itself, it's pretty much, yeah, the official language is Burmese, so that's why the language plays a role. That's why not many ethnic minority becoming the writers. You know, if they become the writers, they cannot use their own mother tongue. Only the Burmese language is the medium for us. You know, so that's why I think when we talk about this, it's like not very positive in terms of freedom after the censorship has terminated during the NLD government. But I have been watching some movie clips in the past before the 2020 general election, and it's that movie clips is the kind of the documentary interviewing general public in so many different cities inside the country, and a lot of general public, both men and women, laymen and the intellectuals, they mentioned that during the last 5 years, they feel pretty safer to criticize their own elected MPs and the regional cabinet members, something like that. So maybe the incidence of the number of people arrested because of they express freely, it's a little bit higher during the last 5 years compared to the U Thein Sein government. But we don't really have that kind of the detailed survey, but it's thought to be, you know, more people dare enough to practice their freedom of expressions compared to the Thein Sein's government. That's also we need to recognize. So that's why I think the whole picture is pretty much complicated. I cannot say black and white in that sense. You know, so I think a good thing is there are a couple of the writers-based or literature-based organizations, like Myanmar is more focused on freedom of expression, but the other organization focus mainly on writers and poets. There are so many came up before the coup.
Thank you so much for sharing this. At this moment, before we turn to open up a more open discussion, I want to invite each of you to share a piece of your writing with the group. A lot of us are really eager to hear some of your work. So I've asked you to choose a short passage just to give us a taste. If you can just tell us where it's from, why you chose the piece, and then just read it to us. I think we'll start with Kokotet, then we'll turn to Tada Ele, and then Matida at the end. And then I'll ask all of you to reflect a little bit on each other's writing for a moment, and then we will open it up to a group discussion with the audience as well for question and answer. So Kokotet, if you could start, that'd be wonderful.
Thank you, Eric. I would like to read a poem from this collection, Bamboophobia. And this collection was written before 2021, actually, and was supposed to be published before that, but then there was some delay and it's just out. So I'm going to read a poem called Celebrations, and from this Bamboophobia. Celebrations. Over here, we celebrate absolutely everything, every single day. Every day is someone's birthday or funeral. Every other day is an anniversary of a massacre or wedding. We celebrate every week when we delouse ourselves by rubbing our shaven heads with lime. Every 3 months, we deworm our stomachs with papaya seeds. We celebrate the spiritual power of our polluted rivers. We celebrate plastic in our air. We celebrate the lives of spiders by frying them for food. We celebrate snakes by skinning them into jerky. Sex, real or imagined, is the celebration of our body's arousal. Orgasm is a celebration of body's contented closure. We celebrate celibacy. We celebrate and are humbled when rapists apologize. We feast with plenty of arak when a mother manages to rent her womb or sell her child. On the occasions of the funerals of poets who died from excessive drinking, we toast rice wine over their graves and get piss drunk. When there is nothing to celebrate, we celebrate for nothing, with nothing. All day long, every single day of the year, we smile and say to each other, "Ni kaung la, thamin sa bibi la? How are you today? Have you eaten?" And "Kaung ipa, sleep well before bed." Come morning, we say, "Thamin sa bibi la, have you eaten?" to celebrate the day, for we are still here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kokote. Tada Ele, would you like to share a passage with us?
Yes, I would like to share some pieces from my short story, The Heat of Laughter, because for me, I am personally more interested in telling the way of survival of people among the chaos conditions, because I would like to empower and increase their resiliency while we are resisting the repressions. So that's why in my short story, in The Heat of Laughter, I wrote about the sense of humor of Burmese people, even in the war situation, because it is easy to make as sad or upset as our world is full of chaos things. However, it's not easy to make a smile. So if we can overcome such bitterness and can make an ironing towards those chaos, I would say is a kind of something that we are free from all anxieties, and I feel that the freedom of our spirits reached to the extreme point. That's why I would like to highlight the sense of humor of Burmese people in my story. So let me read some pieces. Okay, the main character, Chocho, how he is optimistic about the current situation. So Chocho was lucky. He was taken near the start of the protest. Later, the monsters were let loose at night. Criminals roamed the streets. Houses were set on fires. Curfews were imposed. Each day was worse than the one before. And all I could do was cry, curse, and click my tongue in bitterness. Jojo never changed though. After our leaders were taken, we marched in protest for miles across the city. My belly is too fat anyway. It's about time I got some exercise. After Facebook and other sites were blocked, we all turned to VPNs and secure messaging apps. Before, I didn't know anything about this technology. Now I'm like an expert. After the state media announced a new raft of rules and regulations, we could be arrested for any little thing. I'm thinking of becoming a lawyer with all the news law I'm learning about. After the internet was cut between 1 a.m. and 9 a.m. every night, we went back to the wall. Good, now I won't stay up so late watching video. I can get back to my normal sleep routine. After civilian was chased, beaten, and shot, we built defense walls across the streets. If it is a game we have leveled at, This is how Cho optimistic about the current situation with his sense of humor. But here I forgot to mention one thing. There is when the military force shot their gun at midnight in Yangon last year, February. You know, how our people respond to those gunshots was really amazing. At the time, the military shot the gun as to threaten and to make people frightened while they were sleeping. That at the time we turned off the light, and then every time we heard the gunshot, we shouted "Happy New Year!" You know, so our voice yelling "Happy New Year" hugely covered the gunshot. That is one of the ways we responded to the military threat, and I feel there is truly unique, you know, but I forgot to include that one in my story, but other ways of resistance are mentioned. Yeah.
Thank you, Ele. Matida, would you like to share a passage?
Yes, this piece I wrote this piece after the Saffron Revolution, and I think this will be a good one to choose, but I couldn't read. It is quite long, so this is the story called "Living the Horror." But in this piece, I make the writer looking for a piece of writing and writing down its own piece and trying to edit it. So I'm going to read not just about the narratives of the writer, but about its own edited pieces of the writing, excerpts of a bit of this, and then the end of the story, you know. So here it is. Bang, bang, 2 gunshots. This is not a Hollywood studio. It is just a main avenue in a Burmese city, a road peacefully used by public servants, civilians, students, teachers, street vendors, monks, and nuns. A road throbbing with noise, cars, chatting, blaring music, adverts, pigeons, and stray dogs. But these 2 gunshots have transformed it. Now you cannot see anybody on the avenue. Instead of steps, there are just scattered sandals left behind. Not even a pigeon or a dog can be heard, let alone people's voices. It's just a far noon, but the sky is gray and dirty, already threatening rain. The sense of food and fruits from the street vendors have vanished, replaced by smells of smoke and bullets. Avoiding smoky corners, the steps are wavering. An arch to glaze backward is slowing down progress. While looking backward, the forward-moving body is afraid it might get pierced by something at the front. That thought hastens the steps once again. And another piece. That voice is similar. Yes, I heard that very voice not long ago. But then I felt safe. Now I feel the opposite. Still right now, I will make myself face anything if it means getting a story. So tell me what sort of story you have. My voice sounds dry, but the relief of finding I am able to master audible speech steadies my trembling body. I am, but then that familiar voice simply fades away from my ears. That saffron body drifts back into the darkness along with his horrid laughing face. The big hole on his chest floats away like a flying saucer moving into darkness. Strongly through the smell of blood remains as strong as ever. At this moment, another wave of white smoke rises up like a tide. It does not occur to me to ask why an avenue in the middle of this city has become a channel for smoke waves. My whole attention is focused on trying to discern what it is that I can see moving towards me in the smoke. What shapes are gradually emerging. So I'm going to read the last passage. The images that are deep inside the nozzle are gradually approaching my chest. I can see them now. I even know what they are, but I don't have the capacity to define them, not yet. I embrace the fear. I try to embrace the horror, even the kind of horror that is so popular with the masses. But ultimately, I don't have the courage to express that kind of horror. The images are still approaching towards my chest. Stop, please stop. I scream in silence and shut my eyes. Enough. I no longer wish to continue writing this story. Please respect the courage it took to make this request and let me leave the horror. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What I'd like to do is ask the three of you to just reflect on each other's passages for a moment, and then we will open it up to an open question and answer with the group here. I'm curious to understand how you receive each other's writings and some of the thoughts that emerge as you hear each other's work. Maybe I'll start with Kokotet with some reflections on the other two.
Yes. Tora Ile, I like her writing and essays. One of her essays, whose footfall is loudest, is about, you know, the importance of footwear, flip-flops, in the revolution since the 1988, 1962, 1988, 2021. And so after a shootout, military shootout, people usually flee, and all is left could be, often in the streets, could be flip-flops. So she wrote about that touchingly, poignantly. And she is very good at portraying mundane subjects and people, and, you know, in her stories. So my question is quite simple. What were you reading, I mean, recently, and what was your favorite book in Burmese or English, fiction or non-fiction? Yeah.
Actually, there are many books I like. So it's difficult to mention only one. So, but recently, there are some books I have read, but those are academic books, and I don't want to share here. It's a little bit boring. So the one of the book I have recently read is Educated, which is written by Tara Westover. Actually, it's like a memoir she wrote about herself and her family. How she survived under the her discipline father. He was too religious, and how she escaped from the threats of her brothers, who has a very abusive nature. And even though her family supports her education, she tell her story, how she trying to access to education, and how she struggled to obtain the PhD. However, I think the book is more than that, because I feel that not only about the education, she really revealing about her way, how how she deconstructs the religious norms and gender norms. She was shaped for many years. I think this is really important from her story. So it really inspires to me. Yeah.
And yeah, I have a question for Matira too. The question is that, you've been traveling the length and the breadth and the depth of Burma since all over the places in Myanmar, Burma, Myanmar, since 1989. You were part of the NLD campaign, and you were traveling a lot on that campaign in 1989, right? And then by 2019, you were also heading Pan-Myanmar and traveling all over the places. So which city or town in Myanmar would be very friendly or receptive to literary personnel? And what's the difference from 1989 to 2019? I mean,
it's hard to say because I have been to so many places, and what I remember is, according to my experience, appreciation for writers and poets are mainly from the middle of the country, Burmese majority, because the language matters, they can read our piece very well. There will be no language barrier for them. So I think I might say the Bakoku was one of the most interesting during the 1988, according to my experience during our visit to the Upper Burma. They show up, and then you might notice the very beginning of the problem of the suffrage revolution is also from Bakoku. And throughout the days after 2012, literary activities has been pretty much very alive in Bakoku. So maybe I might say that, but there are so many other cities still, I cannot just name it. There are so many other cities are very familiar with some cities, I might say, in Ayawari division, like Hindara. Hindara is famous for having at least 3-4 literary activities per year. For the other cities, they might do only once, but for Hindara, it might be at least 4 or 5, something like that. The poets in Hindara are very, very strong. So poets have their own choice of the literary talk, and the other group also having their own, something like that. That are so many cities are going on like this.
thank you.
Ele, would you like to pose any questions to Matira or Kokotet?
Yes, first of all, I would like to appreciate Suyama Matida first because her work of Sanjiang in St. Harvard. Harvard is the first thing that came to my mind when I think of literature and resistance. Although she wrote about her experience as a political prisoner, after reading her book, rather than being afraid of being sent to prison, I gained the bravery to dare and challenge the prisons. So her book can give us some courage. And regarding Kokotet, I'd like to honor his contribution, that is to engage Burmese literature with the international communities. Because the country was so isolated under the military regime for almost 2 decades after 1988 revolution. But now it's happening again. That you didn't leave us and arrange the book like picking of new shoes will not stop the stream. So thanks so much for that. So my question is so somber. For that. So is there any challenge you ever experienced while you arranging that book? I mean the new shoes will not stop the spring. And for Suyama Matira, I know now you are in Yale, so may I know, your recent works, what are you doing there like that?
Yes, regarding curating and editing of picking off new shoots will not stop the spring. yeah, the first challenge was, I mean, how to collect material. And in the beginning, February and March, we were very much, my co-editor, Brian Hammond, and myself, we were very much assisted by Myanmar, Matida, and got lots of contributions via Myanmar. And later I had to scan, the internet to get quality writing. And also another challenge is diversity. I would like to include a polyphony of voices in the collection. So we had to reach out to other resource persons who might know, this or that ethnic writer and so on. So that way, and we were able to include so many different voices in the book. And another challenge is to get it done in 1 year, because most of the translation was done by me single-handedly, even though there are several other pieces written in English. So that was a full-time job, almost from March to September. So that was a challenge, yeah.
Yes, Matida, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Indeed, I was about to read a small poem. It's called Get Out of a Maze. That's what I'm doing here. I'm thinking of writing a new novel, but in order to write that novel, I need a lot of information. So I have been closely watching my own country, what's going on, and not just currently, but also during the last decades. I trying to understand. I also here at Yale, I try to reach out to the diaspora population, either in person or through the internet. I reach out to them and I try to understand the whole picture, what's going on. And I'm going to start my new book, but still struggling about the structure because my dream is quite a little big, and then the atrocity doesn't stop. It's going on. So I might decide the period to end for my piece, so that will be my my future book. That will be a maze.
Thank you so much. I want to open up to open Q&A from some of our attendees in the audience. So if you would like to ask a question, just raise your hand using the hand raise function of the Zoom interface. If you can't find that, just wave your hand and I'll try and see you, but you'll have to show your video to do that one. I see a question from Al Lim.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the wonderful presentation. And it's great to see you. I think Coco Tet visited Yale West a few years ago, and we had to have lunch at some point there. It was wonderful. So thank you again for talking about the kind of state of Burmese poetry and how y'all are contributing so well, both kind of in Myanmar and internationally. I think my question is about the state of Burmese poetry for like young people. Is it kind of, I'm wondering, like, is it a big thing in universities? Like, how do people get into it? Can you just talk a little bit more about kind of the state of Burmese poetry in Myanmar, both kind of in Yangon and in other cities? And just as a point of comparison, like in Singapore, there's a big kind of like Singapore Poetry Writing Month that Joshua Ip and a few folks run. And so it's being taught in schools. So that's one way people get into it. Whereas in Thailand, it's not as big for young people, I feel, where it's a lot more kind of like formal and very kind of like strict and rigid. And so I'm just wondering, like, how did people get into it? It's great to hear from y'all. I'm just curious about how vibrant it is as a community. Thank you.
Yes, I can speak of poetry as a curriculum in school, which is actually hopeless because for me, school curriculum, they hardly teach any free thinking. So most of the poems are quite rigid and they don't teach contemporary poetry at all. Most of the poets are dead and long gone. So that's one thing. Maybe that's the reason why, on the other hand, there's a vibrant, unofficial, learning of poetry and other modes of literature in Burma. So I often speak of this participatory poetry written by ordinary people who are not necessarily poets, because our Burmese language also is quite a rhyming language. And if you're observing the protests in even in 2021, most of the protest slogans were in couplets written by participatory poets, very powerful and very, in your face against the regime. So these are very impressive lines, such as no negotiation for blood debt, and even picking off new shoes will not stop the spring. That can come from the protests of Burma. So anyway, that's one thing. And on the other hand, they are career poets and professional poets. And as Matija said, in different cities and towns, they are centers of, for how shall I say it? They are literary groups, poetic groups, who usually gather at tea shops, coffee shops, and they just, discuss their poems. And it's like workshops in the West, but they don't usually workshop each other poems, but still, that's in different cities, there are different centers of poetry. Like Moyua has a very vibrant center of poetry, and we lost 2 Moyua poets in 2021 uprising. Yeah.
Thank you, Coco Tet. Paul Sarno, you can ask a question.
This is directed to Malfida. I read and found very informative your book called Prisoner of Conscience, and I understand you've written a second book in English. I can't seem to find it on the World Catalog. Can you tell me, please, the English title and the publisher, if you know?
Yes, the book is called The Roadmap, but it might appear under the name of my pseudonym, Suragamika. The same publisher, the Sixth Form publication from Chiang Mai, Thailand. But that was the earlier book. I wrote that book in English, The Roadmap. I wrote that book in English at that time because of the situation. I dare not to use my own name, so I used a pseudonym, Suragamika. And then, that book was written at Brown, and I moved to Radcliffe, Harvard next year, and I finished writing my prison memoir there in Burmese. But the translation was published, as a prisoner of conscience.
How do you spell Sira, S-I-R?
Sura, Suragamika. Suragamika. It's a kind of the Pali words. Sura means brave. Gamika is a traveler.
Suragamika.
Yes.
K with a K. Kamika.
K.
Okay, thank you. Also, if I can ask one more question, I wondered about how many poets, writers that you know of have left Myanmar since the coup. More than 20, more than 30? How many?
It's hard to say. Most of them, for example, like 5 were arrested, 5 were killed, and round about 14 were in prison, and then a lot has been left, but most of the writers and poets are resisting from the land, from inside. They keep doing.
Have they joined I'm sorry, I can't remember the abbreviation, but the forces that are fighting the junta?
PDF?
Yeah, PDF or the NUG. Have they joined them?
Yes, some's already joined. Yeah, some's already joined the PDF. And the minister of the Ministry of Defense of the NUG himself is a poet.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? I have one, but I don't want to keep asking the only question. I want to open it up to others. Eric White, we have a question.
Hi, thanks. So, in general, there's been a lot of discussion about since the coup, there's been greater engagement, rapprochement, and solidarity between the ethnic Burman majority populations and the ethnic minority populations. And I'm just wondering, do we see similar dynamics within the community of writers of poetry and prose, in the sense of as communities of writers, as communities of readers, as community of commentators? So just wondering how the coup has changed the character, actually, of communities of writers and readers inside of Myanmar and across ethnic kinds of boundaries.
I think I answer your question. It's hard, That's why Pan Myanmar has a plan to have a short story writing workshop with majority of with minorities, especially we pick Kaya, Mon, Chin, and Kachin, and Shan, So that's the program. According to our survey in 2018, there is almost very few from the ethnic minority becoming a well-known writer, Even though we do have a couple of the active communication between these ethnic minorities, it's very hard. That's why I think the ethnic literature is almost not existing, For example, like in Kachin language, there is only the translation of the Bible into Kachin language. There is not much other literature, even though they do have kind of video or the feature movie, something like that, but not in literature form. So it's very hard. Only in Shan and Mon language have their own literature, but it's not very popular. It's never been translated into Burmese to reach out to the broader audience. So it's very hard to make a communication between the writers written in Burmese language with the writers written in other different languages. Only we, Pan Myanmar, try to reach out, but it's not yet successful. Because of the coup, we have planned to have a short story training in Shan State on 22nd February, and it was, banned. I think Jane wants to add something. She's expert in Shan, even though I'm Shan, I don't.
Go ahead, Jane. And while you're talking, I'm going to announce your talk next week too. I'll put it in the chat so people.
Yeah, thank you for. Oh, am I frozen now?
Oh, just for a second, unfrozen now.
Yeah, sorry, I was feeling chilled. Yeah, so the longest continuously operating Shan printing press in Taungji has a huge pantheon of Shan poetry, Shan short stories, comic books, that have been continuously operating, but then also in the Shan liberated territories from the 70s, 80s, and 90s onwards, they operated a lead linotype typesetting machine. So the constant production, and with the digital age, there's a whole lot out there. But also specifically because this revolutionary lit, the ongoing civil war and the ongoing resistance in Shan State is in some ways separate from the activities that have been going on against the coup in the Burmese heartland. So there's a political different orientation, just to summarize it very, very simply, but especially about Shan revolutionary singers. Some of them will make Burmese versions of the songs. So if we want to broaden poetry to include rock and roll and songs, there's a tremendous amount of crossover. between Shan artists and making songs that are accessible to Burma people who don't know Shan. So the language and the political division, can be transgressed in really fascinating and revolutionary ways.
Go ahead, Tada.
I would like to add something. Even though, we are not directly engaging ethnic communities in the coup. Before the coup, as much as I remembered, we had a poetry event 2 years ago. In that poetry event, we brought the Rohingya poets to recite their poems, to reveal their experience. And then even in the new book, Picking of New Shoes, I think some of the writers, even though they are not the ethnic people, I mean the non-Burma, they are just Burma. I think some of their writings can cover other ethnic experience, like the poem of Kathy. I think Sia Kokota can also share that poem, Guda Bien. It was written by Kathy. His poem is really amazing, and I think that is really engaging with the other minorities' experience and sufferings.
Guda Bien by Kathy is not in the collection anthology, Picking of New Shoes Will Not Stop the Spring, but a translation of that poem is published in the research, the Journal of Burma Research. That's out, I think, last week. So there's the poem there. But in Picking of New Shoes Will Not Stop the Spring anthology itself, there are 3 Rohingya poets from different places: Cox's Bazar, Malaysia refugee camp, and Canada. So we are quite happy that and honored that they are contributing those poems to this anthology.
So I wanted to ask a question for all 3 of you about the relationship between content and form in periods of resistance. And the question that has long been on my mind, actually before the events in Myanmar, with my work in Vietnam, one of the burdens that some of my friends who are Vietnamese artists often describe to me is how, as artists, they want to be experimental in particularly artistic ways that are not always driven by telling a story about Vietnam, for example. Their artistic expression transcends Vietnamness or something like, or Vietnamese-ness, or telling the story of quote unquote the Vietnam War or something of that. And I've always been curious, even with the title of this panel, Resistance and Literature, what it's like to be a writer who wants to play with language for the sake of language. Coco Tet, you mentioned some of the couplet forms or some of the literary styles of Burmese language. Matida mentioned when she was younger, when she first got excited about being a writer, it's just the beauty of the language itself. Sometimes that's political, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just artistic expression. But Coco Tet, you also mentioned how the rigid form of certain forms of poetry is also linked to a kind of repressive educational system too. And so I wondered if the 3 of you could reflect just a little bit about artistic expression and the burden of representing resistance and how you manage that a little bit and how you engage with that a little.
Yes. I meant to say that the rigid form itself is not to blame. I mean, when you write in a rigid form, it can lead to uncertain turn. So, but what I meant is that the curriculum itself that that makes the rigid form, and then of course the curriculum itself is full of poems that nationalist kind of poems and so on. This makes it very problematic to become a creative writer. But when it comes to writing and resistance, I like to quote the Peruvian novelist Mario Vargas Llosa. He said that the mere existence of literature is a subversive act. For instance, Burmese novelist Sensei in the 1950s wrote a memoirs about the stigma of syphilis. That was in the 1950s, and the book, in my opinion, was a subversive act. In a time, syphilis was looked down as a curse for one's bad karma. So we can actually write about personal experiences, personal stigma, and become subversive in our own culture, in our own way. So for me, the only responsibility for writers is to write. And beyond that, they should not feel any burden or any expectations from anyone. Because I think resistance writing, just like all other creative activities, must come from within oneself, not from the outside. So a piece of writing, in my opinion, a piece of writing that responds to a group's or an individual's political expectations is rhetoric or propaganda.
I think, yeah, I also, I published a book, it's called My Writing, because, it has been pretty much contradictory to have so many people saying, oh, your piece of writing is a poem, a poetry, or an essay, or a short story. We don't know what it is. And I said, okay, I also don't know what it is because I'm not an academic, I just create it, So let's call My Writing. That's all, Ye Atanya. And that one, it's pretty much like focusing on the strength of the language itself. It might reflect some political issue because I think as a writer, we just use our own individual way of response to the universe. So if the universe surrounding us is pretty much political, our response will be more or less political. There is no way to escape from it. That's all. We just reflecting whatever we are surrounded by, something like that. So even though as an individual writer, of course, our strength is also not just our perspective towards something else, but also the skills, the aesthetic, intrinsic part of the aestheticness. It's also our strength. So that's directly related to how much we can play with the language, the linguist parts of our own languages. That's why I think this is very much, when we talk about the freedom of expression, we need to talk about the language rights. So that's how I see and I enjoy as a writer. We are the owner of our own reflection towards the universe,
Yes, for me, I would like to mention about social resistance through literature rather than the resistance to the dictatorship, because I think I could say that bringing social justice and eliminating social inequalities is much more difficult than there is to end the dictatorship because the discriminatory norms and values are deeply rooted in our society for many centuries. That's why when I'm trying to write something that is to deconstruct the norms, I have to be cautious and not to use the old laws. Yeah, repeatedly, because by using this again and again, I'm afraid of strengthening or reinforcing that word. That's why I try to interchange with other words. For example, in my second novel, What's Mine Is Tomorrow, it is about a young woman who got psychological trauma since she was young because of sexual violence of her cousin, as well as abandonment of her father. So that in that case, the people surrounding her said that she is suffering from hysteria, but she hates that word. What I want to say in that novel is the word hysteria is too gendered. It is framing most people don't think it is concerned only with women. And I also want to explain how Myanmar women are afraid of being said hysterical. So that's why they keep women, they keep their love expressions and never declare their love before men do. So, and the story also tells about how much difficult Myanmar women to divorce their husband. So in that story, as I wanted to deconstruct the term hysteria, I didn't use that word in the whole story. Instead, I tried to interchange with other words to just say that female characters suffering is just a kind of psychological problem like others. It's not concerned with female body and warmth as we used to believe in the past. So here, so what my problem is, whenever I touch the old norms to deconstruct, I have to be cautious of using the words. If I said to you before, so if we use the old terms, I'm afraid that meaning relating to those specific words became repeated, and it's like reinforcing the meanings. That's why I have to be cautious about that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this fascinating discussion. I noticed that we're near the end of our time, so I'm going to bring the conversation to a close. I'm going to turn off the recording, but I'll leave the Zoom open for a few minutes if anyone wants to have any informal chat. But for those of us who are still with us, please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists for a great conversation.